Not lunchtime here, but you know what? We're doing things live now just to keep things dynamic and keep making sure that we can get you all the latest information going on here in our community. Today, we're going to talk about different parts of technology. We're here streaming live from Geekdom, which is a tech epicenter here for San Antonio. But look, tech is being applied into a lot of different disciplines. You hear of, your traditional technology. We've got biotechnology, a little shout out to our friends at Velocity that are focused on that. But there are other areas that people are taking technology into other disciplines to try to make real meaningful change. We've talked about agri-tech and a variety of other techs, but today I've got Alejandra Zertuche that is here to talk to us about Influx and what is going on in ed tech. And so we're going to go ahead and just dive into how technology is changing decision making for education. And we're going to bring Alejandra on right now to talk about what she's got going on. Alejandra, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Matt. Thank you so much for
Okay.
inviting me.
Oh, thanks so much for coming here. And thanks for dealing with us as we still try to figure out how to do this thing live. It's always so cool to do this real time. So, talk to us about Influx and what you guys are doing to really change the way that decisions are being made in education.
So, Enflux is the first decision support system for higher education. And what we do is that we help the schools lower attrition, which means lower the number of students that drop out of the programs. We help faculty save time, and we also help the programs get rid of all the accreditation risk. How do we do that? Well, three ways. We centralize their silo data in a single database. We give them out of the box reporting so that they can have access to the right insights at the right time so that they can make better decisions. And our third component is the action plans. They can document, track, and evaluate all of their decisions and quickly align it with accreditation standards, strategic plan, and more. So it's a one to one solution. It's a one end to one end solution, bringing everything into a single place. And because we're centralizing data, we're helping the schools obtain more return on their investment of all the technology that they're using within a program.
No, that's great. I mean, I come from a healthcare background, being at Methodist Healthcare System, and in healthcare, I mean, we've got disparate systems all over the place. I mean, it's one of the major issues, but we don't talk enough about how actually in education it's not as bad, but there's a lot of different solutions that are used in education, which is just as important in being able to bring those together. For that. I mean, what was your reason for moving in that direction with Influx to go ahead and build this system?
So I'm an industrial engineer, and as an industrial engineer, I was heavily focused on continuous quality improvement. Back then, about 14 years ago, I was well known for being a data nerd, and I always tell people now they call us data scientists. Is a huge promotion. I think that term came around 2000. What was it? 2015 or something.
That's when I was using it, so that's about right. But I always said it in a very endearing way to all data nerds that I ever called one. It was
Yep.
endearing, but yes.
But then they started calling us data scientists, and I became like I was like really intrigued about how to transform data to information and insights, and I was doing that for a German company. So I was doing logistics, production management, uh, doing projections, doing a lot of different things, feasibility studies. And then when I decided to do my MBA, I had to quit my job to become a full time student because of my visa, born and raised in Mexico. So I had to
Okay.
become a full time student and leave my work visa. And while taking a few courses at Incarnate Word, when you're an international student, you can only work on campus. So I was like, I need
Mm.
to find something. So it happened that the pharmacy school needed someone to help them with accreditation. They needed a data nerd. I think the title was like data operator. That tells
It
you how much.
wasn't it
Like,
wasn't data nerd though, was it? That wasn't the title, hopefully, on their on that job description.
well, I guess data nerd would be better than data operator.
That's true.
So I got hired as a student employee, and I helped them process a lot of data for accreditation. And I was asking them like, why are we doing this? And they're like, oh, because we need to show the accreditors that we're doing continuous quality improvement. And I was like, well, this is not continuous if we're looking at the data for the first time in 5 years. Like this is like it should be continuous,
The
right? And I
process is supposed
was
to have a feedback loop, not when the accreditors walk back in. It's got to be continuous feedback loop when you
yeah,
do these things.
I honestly thought it was just our program, and then I realized that, oh my god, all the programs are running in this mode, because back then that was like the first phase of schools using data for accreditation. Before
Mm,
it was more of tell me about your process, or processes, and now it started shifting towards tell me about your process and show me the evidence.
right.
So they were struggling to like utilize data or how to learn, like how to quickly leverage that. So then I stayed there for 5 years. I graduated with my MBA in information systems, stayed there for 5 years. And while I was there, I was doing a master in statistics. I taught business stats because I wanted to teach and see what it was like to teach and assess in the classroom.
Hmm.
And then I started a master's in biomedical informatics, which is what you were talking about in healthcare. There's
Right.
like silo data, the systems don't talk to each other. So there's a lot in healthcare, there's tons of codes that the software companies have to follow so that there's data interoperability within the systems. Well, I went to school for that because I wanted to take the concept in higher ed. But the difference is the schools don't haven't agreed on any code to follow, or the accreditors haven't agreed on that code that the software systems have to use. So Enflux came in as the first the decision support system in higher ed that we own that code. We partner with all the
Mm.
other ed tech companies, and we transform the data to operational needs, and we own that code that makes the data come together. Um,
Interesting. So from a healthcare, for those that are, watching and listening, I mean, the codes you're talking about are like the ICDs that are
ninth and
standardized codes that know exactly what disease. And now with 10, it'll tell you a very, very fine subpart of that disease or condition that you're doing. On the billing side for services, we've got codes, and that's driven by the federal government on
yeah,
how much, excuse me, how much a provider can be reimbursed. But I never realized the fact that there wasn't a standardized language of those type of codes for education. Is it something that it's just because the states are responsible for education in most places and they kind of let the districts do it, and so we have this really, I would say, spread out, everybody doing their own thing? Why isn't there the standardized language
I
for
think it would
codes?
be there are some initiatives.
Okay.
EduCause is one of the nonprofit groups that are trying to accomplish this, and they have made some strides. But it's really hard, right? Like you're working with nonprofit organizations. You're not working with hospitals. Um, the other thing is,
Although most of them they would say are nonprofit or make no profit, there are some that make a lot of
yes,
profit too. But yes,
yeah, it's a we can say it's a private non for profit.
right,
um,
exactly.
So, and we work primarily in health science programs. And the reason
Okay,
for that is because they're more outcomes driven. Like they
right,
need to assess the students and make sure they're competent to practice so that we can avoid medical errors. And in order to know if the students are competent to practice, is not just passing the board exam, but how they did on all the different competencies that they have to master. So
right,
they're using a lot of technology to track students' journey. So the students started at this level of knowledge on this concept, and how are they progressing on their knowledge to the level of mastery? So because we work with health science programs, what I can tell you on that side, it's the accreditor. So there's an accreditation agency and an American association, like a group. So you have
okay,
the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, and then you have the accreditor, and they're the ones that lead these initiatives on what are the competencies that the students need to master, and things like that. But the challenge is that is it's about the schools having the autonomy of doing their curriculum the way they want to do their curriculum, because that's their competitive advantage.
right,
Saying if you go through our program, you're going to graduate and you're going to pass the board exam. And also they have the autonomy of using the tools that they want to use. So there's some standards there. That's why they're called accreditation standards. but it's not a coding language or a tool that everyone has to use the same testing tool. Everyone has to use this. So there's some challenges there because you would have to convince the educational tools to follow a protocol on how they provide data exports or APIs so that the systems can talk to each other.
I've never thought about it that way because, now that you say that, I mean, there was for the longest time all right, your success as an educational institution, whether it be, elementary all the way to even most colleges was performance all by your students on an exam. So then it became about just teach to an exam as opposed to educate a child or a person. But this seems like it allows you to get to be to the ultimate goal where accreditation standards can even be better suited to get to the real objective, which is educating the individual as opposed to just some sort of passing, passing a, board exam, passing, whatever exam it is, like, law schools go through in order to become a licensed lawyer. So, how, how is it that, or maybe what was one of the early lessons? I mean, you learned from moving from really on the front lines of dealing with this to then stepping back to the CEO role as still on the front lines because these are startups, so you can wear multiple hats, but now taking more of this more global perspective for what Influx is doing.
Meaning going from director of assessment to being CEO of a startup,
Much
or
better said than I could. Yes.
I mean, there's so many lessons learned. I come from a really entrepreneurial family, so business. I tell my husband we have. I was like, "You're lucky that you don't understand a lot of Spanish because we're talking business breakfast and dinner." Um, or as my sister says, my husband's name is Matt, and says like, "Oh, Matt, you love my mom because you only understand 20% of what she's saying." And it's like,
Oh
um,
my goodness.
so yeah, there's tons of lessons learned. Like when you start a business, especially in a different country, then you need to learn a lot about more of the operational needs, right? Like you need HR, finance. It's not like bookkeeping. What attorneys do you need? There's a different attorney for APIs versus APIs, IPs. Different attorney for IPs versus attorneys that can help you with a contract or
Right.
with a partnership. So just you keep learning every day. The job of a CEO, it never ends. You keep learning every day, and every day I think one of the things that I would highly recommend anyone starting this journey is to talk to as many people as you can. If you have a question about how do I do intellectual property, how do I submit it, just call people, ask, pick up the phone, like LinkedIn. People will meet with you and give you kind of the shortcuts on how do you get there and how can you get it accomplished. Um, but I mean, the biggest lesson learned because I didn't found Enflux. I joined as a senior analyst and then became CEO. I think the biggest lesson was that when you know you need to let people go, you just have to do it. If you know, they
Mm.
know. And there's just awkwardness in the room, especially back then when we were all in person. But it wasn't because I didn't want to it wasn't because I was having a hard time letting them go, meaning like I didn't want to confront like the hard thing to do. I didn't want to do it was because I really wanted to save them. I
Hmm.
really wanted to figure out how to keep them within the company. And by doing so, I didn't realize that I was putting everything at risk. So then you might save their job, but then for how long?
That's right. Well, and then at what cost? I see that a lot. There was a very wise, business person when I was, young in management that said, hire slow, fire fast. And that
Yeah.
may seem cruel, but that can be taken in the wrong way too. But the reality is that you're always looking for culture fit into what you're doing, and it's got to be culture fit and skill fit. And the hardest ones I think for people is when they're a culture fit, but they're not a skill fit. Those I think are the hardest ones
Yeah,
because they
you're
fit
nice.
within. But the reality is they can do just about as much damage as somebody that's a skill fit, but not a culture fit.
Mm,
the culture that person you see because they create somewhat of a toxic environment, but the one that doesn't have the skill, especially when you're dealing in technology, could be sprinkling out a bunch of little problems that you don't know until one day and go, oh wow, this thing's got bugs all over it because somebody didn't know what they're doing. But yeah, no, I mean, I've experienced that myself. I've had, others, clients, those sort of things as well. It's a difficult thing to do,
yeah.
for those situations.
And it's always scary, right? Because you do need to do like an assessment, kind of risk assessment. And even if you do that, you're scared because you're like, what are the dependencies? What's going to happen? How is the team going to take it? But I have learned that you just have to do it. It's the best thing for both. It's a win-win. Like
Yeah,
that person, do you think that person doesn't know? They probably know and they can feel it, and they just they won't do it by themselves. You just have to talk to them, and then they have to find other opportunities. You're getting in the
that
way.
that's right. It happens, and especially you can survive in larger organizations. I mean, education, right? Those are
Mhm.
largely bureaucratic type organizations, and people can survive and go through all those. But especially in the startups, the small, medium sized businesses where you get a very close knit group, it's critical for those. It's critical for a variety of reasons. It's interesting too because the way you were just talking, you're very analytical. So I'm like, yes, the dependencies and all those, and I'm like, for that last situation, I did think about the dependencies, even though my mind didn't realize I was doing all that. But most of the time, our emotions get in the way, and is what stops us from doing what logically we know we have to do.
Yeah.
You know, in looking at influx and talking with you through all that, one of the other, I think things that was very something that I thought was very interesting was your strategic alliances on how you partner. And you've mentioned it even a little bit earlier about other ed tech companies that you're partnering. Can you talk a little bit more about those strategic alliances and what those entail?
Yeah, absolutely. So Enflux is leveraging the data that the schools are collecting through other tools. Like there's a testing tool, there's a learning management tool, there's different tools within the school. Because of that, we don't compete with them. So we're
Mm,
kind of like data agnostic, or the Switzerland of data technology. So we don't compete with them. We actually come in and transform the data to insights, and we
mm.
add a lot more value to their data without asking them to like have technical depth or their tech team to dedicate time to it, without asking them to um, like build a solution for us. We just build a connection, a partnership. We build a connection, and by having a partnership, we are making sure that we're processing the data or transferring the data in a secure way, right? So that we have all the protocols, we have the legal paperwork, we're taking care of the customer and taking care of each other. So those partnerships allow us to provide more to their customers without them incurring any cost. And then for us, we're selling that data back to their customers, but as insights.
Right,
So that's how the partnership works. So it's a really trifecta win, because the ed tech company that partners with us obtains more value. Like they can provide more value to their customers without costing them anything.
right,
Um, they have a better value proposition, and then the customer is able to get more return on their investments, transform all of that data that they're collecting with really expensive tools to something that they can use. And for us, that's our business.
right.
We're here to transform their data to operational needs.
So, I mean, it's a unique, it's not a unique actually, but it's an interesting strategy because I think of the tools that like I use in the legal profession. There are certain tools that the fact that they have interoperability or the ability to API with other resources we use is actually why that value proposition is why I pay that extra part because it's a connector a variety of ways. So I can see, how our social media is doing, how the website's doing, how our emails are doing as we communicate with people. And that can actually be combined in to see what our funnel looks like with regard to new clients and stuff. So it's a great strategy because I mean, there's one tool in particular I paid just because of that insight and the fact that they have a robust connection with all the other tools that I use makes that really indispensable. For what they do.
Yeah, I
Um,
think now schools are looking at Influx and going like, who are your partners? Because we're starting a new program and we want to work with those tools because we don't want to reinvent the wheel.
right.
Meaning, right, we want to use tools that we know are integrated with Influx so that we can start looking at how the students are doing, how's the curriculum, how are we doing on accreditation. Like all the connections are out there. Kind of like saying I have QuickBooks and I'm
Right.
looking at billing, or I don't know, I'm looking at another tool like a bank. Which bank am I going to partner with? Well, you're not going to partner with the one that doesn't talk to your QuickBooks account.
That's right, because I don't want to do it manually. I just wanted to click the button and have it in there so that way I can see it all. That's very well said. We talked a lot about the accreditation part and the process for the institutions and organizations on how that gives them the insight. But you've mentioned it here, and I know that's another big part is the student success part of your tool and what it does. Talk a little bit about what Inflex does and uses technology to actually have it a better experience for the actual student in the organization.
Well, everything we do is student centered. So it's academic intelligence for student success. And the reason for that, it's like how we talk about it is every time that we're saving faculty time, like every time the faculty is not spending 8 hours on spreadsheets trying to crunch numbers, they're
Right.
dedicating that time to actually help the students. Every time a committee is not spending time on cleaning the data, but actually looking at the insights and taking action, that's where the value is because they're making sure that the curriculum is bulletproof, the curriculum is high quality so that the students can be successful. Um, so I was talking in the beginning how the schools create their own curriculum. And what that means is they create their own courses, what topics are going to be taught on those courses, and in what order. And that's their competitive advantage. If they don't do a good job at that, they can lose students. And if they lose students in health sciences, let's say simple numbers, you admitted 100 medical students, each of them pay $50,000 of tuition a year. If you lose 10% of those, that's 10 students that are not going to keep going on the second, third, and fourth year. So you're losing $1.5 million just for the incoming class.
Right.
So schools are losing on average. Well, it depends on the discipline, but there's some schools that have disciplines that have averages of 10 or 12% attrition.
Wow.
And it's not just the schools losing revenue, but think about the student that went through the first year with a loan of 50,000 and probably the undergrad loan as well, and they don't even have a degree to pay for the
Right.
loan. Right.
Right.
So it's a huge responsibility. So we focus on student success, meaning providing to the schools all the insights that they need so that they can make better decisions and spend more time on things that matter and they do well instead on spreadsheets.
No, I think that's great. And I guess for me, so I'm not a data nerd because I'm not that smart, but I am a process nerd. And you just kind of brought up something that, again, from my experience at Methodist is, we've got process and we've got inputs and we've got outputs. And still, most people judge things by the outputs. But there's things with regard to process and in process measures. Are you guys able to, again, it sounds like that's the case, provide, in process things for students so that way there's risk factors or anything else like that. So that way somebody that may be heading off that path of that 10 to 12% can actually be addressed, readjusted, and likely stay versus just, oh, you know what, they're leaving and they're telling us as they go out the door, bye, bye, bye. Is Influx able to help that with some of those in process things for
Yes,
education?
absolutely. One of our customers just did a research that was recently published where they show how they reduce attrition from 8 to 2% within the first semester they implemented Influx. And the way we do that, how we help them is that imagine they can track the students in real time on how they're performing on the current courses. So what they were doing is in the middle of the semester, they were going into Enflux to quickly identify with a few clicks which students are at risk. And they all have different definitions of what a student at
Sure.
risk means. But then they were able to intervene, create an action plan, track that, document it, and even get alerts and visualize in a visual, get a status that we meet with the student was the strategic plan, so that they can pass the course. So they were able to actually identify the students at risk immediately. Something that used to take them like 2 weeks took them just a few minutes to identify. So now all the time is spent with the student to
Right.
help them be successful. Um, some schools that the schools that don't have Enflux, that are doing things in Excel spreadsheets, they look at the data until the students finish the first term, the academic term, or they finish the academic year. By then, it's too late. Or if it takes them two weeks to process data on a 12-week semester, then it's too late. When they identify the students at risk, the student might need more than 100 on the final exam.
Right.
So it's too late to intervene and help them out. So yes, Enflux, to answer your question, we track the students across all, like, the student journey from when they start to how they do in the didactic courses, which means the courses where they sit down, the usual classroom courses.
Hmm.
Then they go on clinical rotations. So then we pull data from one of our partners, is Core Higher Education Group. They do clinical rotations evaluations. So we pull that data to see how they're being evaluated by the preceptors, meaning the doctors, the nurses, the PAs that are taking the students in for internships, for simplifying the word. And then from there, they take standardized tests to see how they're doing on the competencies. And then from there, they go and take the board exam. So we're able
Wow.
to bring the whole journey so that you can see how the student started from the first year to graduation, and even at a cognitive level, meaning
Wow.
they started being assessed on the knowledge level, and this is how they did, to synthesis. What we have found is that some professors are not seeing the cognitive, like, it's easy, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
And you start testing the students at a really high cognitive level, and what happens is that the students are failing, but they're failing because they never got the opportunity to master the lowest level of
Mm.
Bloom's taxonomy. You're testing them at the highest.
Right.
So the students need that progress. They need to be assessed at the lowest to the highest.
So with that amount of comprehensive data, is the hope for predictive modeling of, I mean, are you grabbing in, like, let's say I'm going to go to medical school, they'll get demographics for sure, but are you building in my academic history that gets sent? I mean, you go to a grad school, you have to go and call every single institution you've ever been at and get a transcript sent over, so that data exists. Is that something where you can look at someone, the input, and predict potentially an output of the likelihood of success for a program?
Yeah, I have, when I was at the University of Incarnate Word, I did machine learning to identify, predict which students were going to fail. And then we identified the students, and we did a huge intervention. Like I said, I'm just the delivery of the insights, and then
Right.
the experts took that and helped the students prepare. And we had a huge increase on the passing boards for that
Mm.
class. I can't remember if it went from like 70s or 80s to like 90s,
Wow.
for that class. And at Influx, I wanted to start there, but then we needed the kind of the stepping stones. And what I mean by that is, we first needed to connect to the data sources directly, because we
Right.
onboard a customer in a week. If the customer gives us access to everything, we can onboard them 5 years of data or more. They get to see everything right away. So in
Wow.
order to do that, we needed to first make sure we have the right connections and processes. And then the second one is transform the data or normalize it, or ETL, because student John Smith is being identified as John Smith 2 or 3, or
Right.
the
Junior, even
courses
those
and the
two. Yeah,
faculty.
exactly.
So we own that code. That's the codes we were talking about, right? ICD
Okay.
10 or 9 in healthcare.
Yep.
So we have that code to clean the data and bring it all together.
Wow.
Then from there, we need to enhance the data. So add more, like, academic terms to some evaluations, group it in cohorts and classes. So there was a lot of data enhancement that needed to take place. Um, then from there, it was like bringing the whole picture together. Now we're at that point of predictive analytics, but we what we're doing is that through our platform, now the customers can download their data to do their own analytics, and they love
Wow.
that. So we're slowly like doing another side of business, which is called data as a service. We
Hmm.
process your data, we transform it, we enhance it. Here it is, and they can do their own analysis, and then they can bring it back up to Enflux so that they can share it with their team and they can
Wow.
collaborate with each other. But that being said, yes, there are current projects right now that we're doing with predictive analytics by considering the whole picture of the student journey and the admissions data.
Right.
So taking all of that in consideration. Um, but the other thing that we're doing is because we're processing so much assessment data is that we release our first AI tool that identifies what the professors are assessing on their rubrics or questions. So that way we
Ooh.
can label the topics.
Explain more about that. That's interesting. So you're able to identify across a variety of institutions what the rubrics look like, what their assessment rubrics look like.
Like their assessments, rubrics, quizzes, exam questions, fill in the blanks. We can process all of that and imagine that we're labeling them or setting a category and saying
Hmm.
these are about chemistry, these are about biomed, these are about this, and then we know the performance. So then we can create that picture or context
Right.
transcript where you can say this is how the student is performing on these competencies.
Got it. So now you're going to have a competence scorecard that's at the end of this thing based upon that category. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. So, you know, is the future of this? I mean, I know we're talking really. I mean, I think all of this has been, medical related for programs, but is Influx have this, currently or potentially into the future to move into the lower parts of the education system? I mean, I go the complexity balloons when we get to when you start looking at high school, middle school, elementary, but the processes and this sort of the features you're talking about, I'm sure exist. What is your thoughts about moving that into the secondary and lower schools?
We can definitely do that. We're not targeting them
Okay.
because that's another lesson learned. As a startup, you cannot just shoot for the ocean. You need to stay super focused on who your market is and stay within your product market fit. So our market, we don't have to educate them on the importance of using tools to assess student outcomes or collect student outcome data.
Right.
On the undergrad world, they're still doing things on paper. And the way they do assessment, like saying, oh, let's see how the students are competent on something, is that they pick 4 skills, 5 skills, like writing, communication, this, and they do kind of a time study, like let's do these random assessments and collect the data, and then, oh, we're good. But things are changing. Things are moving towards that. I wish I like that was our strategy for day one, but no, we were just lucky that I was at a pharmacy school and started in health sciences. But what's happening, Matt, is that now we have business schools, nutrition schools, undergrad programs seeing Influx and being like, huh, that's what I need. What
Right.
tools do I need to use so that I can get that? So inputs and outputs, right? So it's like, I
Yeah.
want this output, but what are my inputs? And that's where the partnership, the ecosystem of edtech companies that we have, it's extremely valuable for our partners and for us because we
Well,
are sending referrals to them.
right. I mean, again, you're becoming the central part of the ecosystem, which is great for you and for them to be able to do this. This is fascinating. Again, for me, I'm a process nerd, so just thinking about, I never wanted to, see how the data was created or cut. I just wanted, I knew things I wanted to see, and it sounds like you guys are mastering that at Influx with regard to the customers that you serve. Before I let you go, because I did want ask you a couple of questions regarding just process and startups, because We're here at Geekdom streaming right now. Geekdom Velocity, they're fantastic of, empowering our community here in San Antonio and South Texas with regard to ideation and acceleration. But at the core of all business is process and process controls and stuff. What do you have? What advice would you have for a young entrepreneur that maybe doesn't have certainly a data analytics background, but maybe not even a being in an organization that was process driven? What would be your recommendation on how to really gain some of that knowledge quickly?
Well, it depends on where the startup, like if the startup has money or not, right? Like what's
That
the
always depends. That one.
right?
That always
Like,
depends.
and the reason I'm saying that is if you have a grant, there's different sense of urgencies. If you're bootstrapping, there's a different sense of urgency
True.
versus you raise money. And what I mean by that is like there's always going to be processes, and nothing is going to be perfect. But you shouldn't focus on let me make the processes perfect. What you should focus on is what can I do today that is going to contribute to revenue, right? But that is going to contribute to growth. And then if I have time left, I'll focus on the processes. But don't get into like a process of, oh, let me have a billing process. I'll never forget that. I was like, but this is so messy. Let's have a billing process and I can build all of this. And then it is like, but why would I need that if I only have 5 customers? Like, we're just starting. Let's get to 50 and then we'll talk about it, right? So I think that most CEOs, they're really, well, all CEOs are really adventurous and they take risk. But
Not
sometimes you
all
might,
of them. I'll tell you, I've got some that are not. Some of them are downright like Scrooges. Will keep control and say we're not changing anything. It's been like that forever. But a lot are. I will give you that.
but you have to change, right? Change,
Hmm.
like, you cannot expect change if you keep doing the same thing over and over again. Like, it's just unrealistic. But yeah, I think advice with processes is don't get too deep into fixing a process. Focus on things that are going to bring revenue. Focus on the sales process, focus on the marketing process, but don't focus on billing or Jira and how we're going to take the tickets or like
Right.
no, and also divide and conquer, right? Now we're at a different stage, and I brought a CEO in the beginning of the year, and now we're looking at those processes after 5 years, six. Like now we're putting a
Right.
lot of processes that a big company has, but I'm glad that we're doing it now and that we didn't spend the resources at the time 2 3 years ago because it wouldn't even make sense.
No, I think that's great advice. Having a basic process, for everything works, but most of the time, continuous process and continuous improvement would say, you know, get one, start going, and then just keep improving on an iterative nature will get you to a much better outcome for your process, and probably cheaper and more efficient than writing on a white wall everything and then having a binder of all my processes. What is it, ISO 9000 or whatever? That's just document processes. That's great, but it doesn't get you anywhere, especially for a startup. So I think that's great
Yeah.
advice.
Well, it goes to inputs and outputs, right? Like
Hmm.
what's the output? What do you want to focus on? Is it revenue? Is it more customers? What is it? And then let the team run, give them autonomy. You're a startup. You need to see what the skills are from your first team members, but let them run, give them autonomy, but also with the guiding star, right? These are our KPIs. This is what we're after. And if it's working, it's not broken, don't try to fix it, right?
That's
Just
right.
keep focusing on the things that are working. And then when you get at a different stage, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Why do we need, I don't know, like, why do we need a customer success person for every 10 accounts? We need
Right.
to improve that. We like it's the costs doesn't make sense, blah blah blah. Then you can start thinking about how do we make that 1 to 50. So then you can start looking at the process.
It's great advice. Alejandra, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this. I've really enjoyed it. I love talking, process and data and everything, especially in the education world. And we wish you the best in and Influx the best in what you're doing, especially as I mean, with data comes better decision making, and with better decision making in the education is better education. It's just improving the world through all that. So thank you so much for what you do. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, that's great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So, for all of you that are watching here or watching live or watching on a recording, we really appreciate your time. These are the kind of conversations that we always like to have to feature innovators in our community in San Antonio and South Texas that are literally changing the world, like Alejandra and what she's doing with the ed tech there at Influx. Now, if you haven't yet, subscribe to our platform. Whether you're watching us on social media, you can click the button to make sure you don't miss anything. If you're watching us on Spotify, YouTube, click subscribe to not miss an episode because you never know who we're going to be featuring. As always, we really enjoy this. If there's anything we can do for you, let us know. At the South Texas Business Lawyers, our goal is to educate, support, and advise every startup, small, and medium-sized business in the state of Texas. And if it's something that we can help you with, please let us know. Until next time, we'll see you and the South Texas